Don't forget, you can reach the latest episode of Potomac Watch anytime. Just ask your smart speaker, play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. Kim mentions the other context for this decision, which is that they already have President Trump on the docket tomorrow. On Thursday, they are taking up this case from Colorado, which decided to remove Donald Trump from the ballot as an insurrectionist under the 14th Amendment. Let's start with a prediction from former Attorney General Michael Mukasey on Fox News this weekend about what he thinks is going to happen in this case.
I think they'll reverse. The question is the ground on which they will reverse. There's a whole child's garden of grounds that they could use. I just hope that whatever ground they use, they are unanimous, because I think that would help validate whatever the decision is. If they go riding madly off in all directions, that kind of undermines the authority of what they do, even though it shouldn't.
Alicia, what should listeners expect when these oral arguments begin tomorrow at the Supreme Court?
This case concerns the Colorado Supreme Court decision that disqualified Donald Trump from the 2024 presidential ballot under what's known as the insurrection clause or Section 3 of the post-Civil War 14th Amendment. And basically, Section 3 says that any senator, House member, or officer of the United States who engaged in or committed a rebellion cannot serve again. And basically, the issue here is, one, does the president qualify as a quote-unquote officer of the United States? And the Colorado Supreme Court ruled that he did, overruling a trial court decision. And two, the question is, well, was President Trump's actions on January 6th, were they, quote unquote, engaging in an insurrection? And now, again, this Colorado Supreme Court said he did. I think the Supreme Court basically had to take this case. The Maine State Secretary of State has also issued a similar determination. And you're seeing this across the country where liberal groups or anti-Trump groups are trying to remove him from the ballot or get him disqualified. So again, I think the Supreme Court had to take up this case. Now, I think this should be a unanimous decision, but as Mukasey mentioned, it's what grounds do they just decided on this narrow, and I think what would be the straightforward ruling that, well, the president of the United States is not defined in this insurrection clause as a quote-unquote officer of the United States. Or do they actually try to define what an insurrection is and whether what he did on January 6th could be defined as engaging in an insurrection? I don't think they really want to wade into that. And I think this, again, if they wanted a unanimous ruling on this issue, they take the former approach. But you may see some concurrences and dissents on the latter.
I think that's an interesting way to frame it, because that's the heart of the issue. Is what happened on January 6, 2021, is that an insurrection under the 14th Amendment, which, again, was framed after the Civil War and aimed at Confederates? And two, is what Donald Trump did in the lead up to that, does that qualify as engaging in insurrection? Because you have to meet both parts of that test. But Kim, I agree that if the goal for the Supreme Court, and you can imagine that Chief Justice John Roberts probably has this in mind, if the goal is a unanimous ruling or a near unanimous ruling, it may be more palatable for some members of the court to go with one of these more technical arguments, such as whether the president of the United States qualifies, is even covered by this section of the 14th Amendment, which, again, specifically names senators, representatives, electors for president, and then has this catch-all language, officer of the United States.
Absolutely. And look, this would be a good case for the Supreme Court to agree to do that kind of technical decision making if it meant you could get a unanimous verdict, because I really think we need a strong message here for a whole bunch of political and constitutional reasons. And, you know, that one in and of itself, the technical argument, is in fact very sweeping and strong. Not only is there a lot of other examples in the Constitution suggesting that the offices of president and vice president are different than that, there's actually history showing that initial drafts of that amendment had those titles in it, president, vice president, they were taken out in the end. There's another technical question here as well, too, as to whether or not this amendment is self-executing, meaning, which I would argue it isn't, meaning it doesn't authorize the state courts or state officials to either enforce the provision or make a process by which they determine whether or not someone has engaged in insurrection. In fact, quite the opposite. This very specifically charges Congress with enforcing that particular aspect of it. And Congress did so at the time, back in the 1870s, by coming up with a law explaining how they were going to deal with this question of disqualified office holders. So there's a couple of technical ways they can go. I think that the necessity of doing this is so powerful because if the court, for some bizarre reason, decided to actually allow this to stand, you could have a patchwork across 50 states of every state deciding whether or not a candidate could be on a ballot. You could have them coming up with their own random arguments for what counts as insurrection. I mean, you could see a Republican state right now claiming that Joe Biden's failure to police the border somehow amounts to an act of or allowing an insurrection. So there's that problem. But I think, too, if they don't do it unanimously and this comes across as a split court decision, it's going to make it look really political when, in fact, this should be a pretty cut and dry argument. It's way out of the bounds of normal legal thinking.
Thank you, Kim and Alicia. Thank you all for listening. You can email us at pwpodcast@wsj.com. If you like the show, please hit that subscribe button, and we'll be back tomorrow with another edition of Potomac Watch.